Hi, welcome to Property Investor Online. I'm David Humphreys, and this is my foundation course for property investors. So let me show you what this course includes. The course content and structure. The foundation course consists of 17 modules altogether. Each module includes 2 or 3 videos, and each video lasts 8 to 12 minutes. So let's look at the aims and objectives. The aims and objectives are, first of all, to give you the benefit of my 40 years experience. I started in property investment back in the 1970s, and this course is the result of my personal experience over the years. Everything in this course I have done personally. The second aim is to give you the knowledge to make the right decisions. Property investment is all about making decisions, often on a daily basis and certainly a weekly or monthly basis. And without the right knowledge, you won't make the right decisions. Also, if you make wrong decisions, it can be very expensive, because property investment assumes that you are going to be borrowing a substantial amount of money. I will also show you how to make the numbers work. People think of property investment as bricks and mortar, when in reality it's a numbers game to a great extent. You need to understand percentages, leveraging, compounding, rates of return, and many other principles. All of this is covered in this foundation course. I will also show you how to choose the right property and tenant. You need to match the right property with the right tenant. As an example, if you're going to let to students, you need to find a property that they ideally want to rent in the location where it is, and that property probably would not be suitable for family occupation. You also need to be able to invest safely. As I said earlier, buying to let involves borrowing to let. And therefore, if you're borrowing money as part of your investment, you need to do it safely so that you don't get into trouble. And we cover these points in this foundation course. I will also show you how to develop the right personal strategy for you. There are many strategies, but there are probably only 2 or 3 that are right for you personally. As an example, an investor in their 20s, early 30s, let's say, would probably have a very different strategy to an investor in their 50s, early 60s. Both are right strategies for the investor, but they could be very different strategies as well. And finally, I'm going to show you how to make money in any market. Making money in a buoyant, rising market is very easy. The test comes as to whether you can make money in a difficult market, a static market, or even a falling market. And even if the market is falling, it is still possible to make money. So through the foundation course, I will show you all of these 5 points and many more. Now I want to start off giving you a little history on where buy-to-let came from and the private rented sector. In the 1900s, 90% of homes were rented. Today the figure is closer to 17% and rising quickly as we become a nation of renters. Go back a few years and it was as low as 14–15%, and before the turn of the century it had dropped to around 10%. This is one of the lowest levels in Europe. The closest is 16% in the Netherlands. 25, 30% through Germany, France, Spain, rising to over 50% in Switzerland. Now, the socio-economic effects on this move into home ownership have been huge, because people with owning their own home have not been prepared to move if employment ceased in their home location. The cost of moving was very high, as against moving from one rented property to another, and therefore the workforce became inflexible. And if people lost their work, they were prepared to stay at home and wait for the work to come back to them. Also, the private rented sector had been a political football until 1988. The left-wing governments regarded making money out of tenants as almost sinful, and often when the left-wing governments came into power, the Labour Party came back into power, they passed retrospective legislation which was against the interests of landlords, and this completely unsettled the industry. This legislation was never passed retrospectively in respect of commercial property, which is one of the reasons why you see so many empty office blocks. But people did not get involved in the private rented sector to any great extent until around 1988. This was also partly the result of the Rachman scandal in the 60s, the early 60s. Rachman was a man who bought tenanted properties in Notting Hill at very cheaply because they were tenanted with basically lifetime tenants. And he then set about obtaining vacant possession by fair means or foul, more often foul. And as a result, he evicted people, he harassed people, and his activities gave rise to a lot of current a lot of current pro-tenant legislation, such as the laws against harassment and eviction. If you want to know more about Mr. Rachman, Google him. It was also socially undesirable to be a landlord, primarily because of the Rachman scandals. Back in the 60s, if somebody professed to being a landlord, to owning property which they let, they were accused of being a Rachman, and nobody wanted to associate or be associated with this particular person. And therefore, the interest in the private rented sector really did not take off. But there was a change of attitude in 1988 with the landlord's right of repossession and market rents. Prior to 88, if a landlord let a property, he had no right to basically chuck the tenant out or obtain vacant possession even legally if he wanted to sell the property, for example. Tenants had almost a tenancy for life, and this caused properties to be devalued because typically people wanted to buy properties with vacant possession. Also, prior to 1988, if a tenant didn't like the amount of rent that they were being charged, they could take it to a fair rent tribunal, and the rent tribunal would determine the amount of the rent, and it would remain fixed thereafter. The landlord could go back to the tribunal to increase the rent, but the tribunal would not take into account things like increasing interest rates. And therefore it became unprofitable to let property, because you had the position of not being able to get vacant possession of your property if you wanted to sell it, and also you had the position of having to charge a rent that was dictated by a tribunal. Now, this was followed by the Arla initiative Buy-to-Let in 1996. And what Arla did, and Arla is the Association of Residential Letting Agents, is they came up with an initiative called Buy-to-Let, which more properly should have been called Borrow-to-Let, because it involved 7 lenders, a panel of 7 lenders agreeing to lend to landlords or to investors buying property on the basis of future rents, not yesterday's rent, but the rent that they would be able to charge if they bought the property, as confirmed by an Arla agent. Now, this was a groundbreaking initiative. Even today, your private home mortgage is based on yesterday or last year's income, whereas the buy-to-let mortgage is based on the future rents that you're going to receive. And such was the interest that in the first 6 months following the Arla initiative being launched, they received over 180,000 inquiries. New Labour did not reintroduce the old political dogmas and as a result confidence returned to the private rented sector and buy-to-let. And today, buy-to-let is considered part of mainstream investments. Well, that brings me to the end of a little history and to the end of the first video in this first module. So I look forward to seeing you on the second video.